Anderson. I was born May the 9th, 1898, in a house up east of Pleasant Grove that my father and mother built. My father and mother were immigrants from Denmark, and when they came here, father had been here about a year and a half and went back to Denmark on a mission, trying to get his family into the church. And when they built the house, my mother said that she stomped the mud and the straw together, and they put the mud adobies into a frame, and father laid the house up and did the work on the house. And I remember living in that house. It was a 3-room house. And of course it's been built onto since that time, but now it was burned down here a few years ago. And when I was 4 years old, my father bought this place here. This is just 4 blocks east from Pleasant Grove Center Street. And father was a harness maker. He trained in Salt Lake City with his brother-in-law in the harness business. And he built a shop down here in town, or at least a shop. But it was so far to walk from way up there east of town down to the harness shop, so you want to get near to town. And when I was 4 years old, we moved down here. I lived here until I was about 13, and I had to get out and work. I worked over in American Fork. Well, maybe better hear from my wife. Let's see what she has to say about her birth.
No? I'm Elizabeth Anderson, but I've always been known as Bessie. My father insisted on naming me Elizabeth after his grandmother, but after by the time I was a year old, I was Bessie. So I didn't use the name of Elizabeth for many, many years. But I'm known as Bessie, and people from Syracuse will know me as Bessie Smith. I was born in Granger, Utah, in the 4th of November, 1904. When I was 4 years old, my father moved his family to Salt Lake for a year, and we lived in my grandfather's home for a while. And then he bought a home in Syracuse and took us and moved his family out there. My father and mother lived the law of polygamy for a wife, and my mother, it was my father's second wife. The first wife didn't have any children, and anyone who knows the family up there knows this. He lived in Layton, and he moved our family to Syracuse. I had 7 brothers and sisters, 3 sisters and 4 brothers. We were all raised in Syracuse, excepting the 2 younger ones who died there.
Are they buried in the cemetery in Syracuse?
No. My brothers and sisters are buried all around. There's 3 of us left. I have a sister in Salt Lake, and she would be a good one for you to talk to, our youngest sister. And she knows a lot more about Syracuse than I do, because she lived there 10 years after I left.
What was her name?
Emily.
Emily Smith.
Emily Smith.
What's her married name now?
Parker.
Parker.
Where would she be living now?
1647 Garfield Avenue. 1647 Garfield Avenue. Yes, and she'd be a very good person to talk to.
Brother Anderson, what brought you to Syracuse and when?
Well, when I left Pleasant Grove here, I went to Henninger's Business College in Salt Lake, and I trained in business. And then I got a job as a bookkeeper out to the West Dip mine, a gold mine out in Tooele County. Then I came into Salt Lake and went to telegraphing, the Western Union Telegraph Company. I was able to operate the automatic telegraph system. And one day, Arthur, my brother Arthur, who's just got to be the principal of the Syracuse school, came in. It was during the war, and he says, "Owen, I want you out to Syracuse Monday morning to teach school." And I said, "Well, Arthur, I got a job here. I can't walk off with this job." He said, "Never mind," he says, "you got to come out. We need you badly out there." And so Monday morning, I packed all my stuff and all the books I had. Of course, being a school teacher, I would bring all my books, and they were heavy. And I carried my books and suitcase and my violin and got off the interurban at Clearfield and walked down to Syracuse School. When I was walking down, I met a man who stopped and picked me up for about a mile. It was Mr. Barnes, who owns that half square mile of land out there, and he owned the cannery. He told me, he says, "If you'd have been two people, I wouldn't have picked you up. But if you're alone, I thought I could pick you up safely." And that's how I happened to know Mr. Barnes, who owns the cannery out there. I walked down to the schoolhouse.
What year would this be?
This is in 1916, long in September. I walked down to the schoolhouse. When we got about a half a mile from the schoolhouse, 3 or 4 boys came up toward me, and they told me they came to meet me. And they took my suitcase and heavy stuff, carried it out to the schoolhouse. I got down there about a half an hour late. And so Arthur took me in the classroom, the 5th and 6th grade, and told me that this was my class, my schoolroom, to teach school. Now, I hadn't had any experience in teaching school, and I wasn't trained for that. But I'd try anything. You want some experience of the first day of school? Well, the first day of school, I thought, I'm going to begin by having the students sing a song. I sang a song in school, so I'm going to have them sing a song. And I had all the students stand up, and we were singing a song, and in walks Arthur. And he went, "Sit down." He said, "We don't stand when we sing songs in this school." I'll never forget that. So we sat down, and the first day I had a struggle. But you know, they were very kind. The students were very kind and courteous to me, and I enjoyed it very well. But we did have some discipline problems in that school, and that's why they had no teacher, because the teacher the year before didn't come back because of discipline problems.
I remember him.
And
His name was Mr. Knoll.
well, I can't remember all the days it happened, but I worked hard there and tried to be, Arthur, of course, trained me. He's a trained teacher, so I got along pretty well. And then the second year I signed a contract. My first contract was for $60 a month. And my second contract was for $65 a month, the second year. And I enjoyed the second year much more than the first year. But then for the next few years, I went to summer school, and I took extension work and training. And they had a class over at Kaysville High School that I went to every week to try to learn something about it. Now that covers, I guess, how I got out of Syracuse, how I got started. Anything else you want to know about it?
On the old school, was it 4 rooms at that time, or what was the description?
4 rooms. 4 rooms in the schoolhouse.
He-
First and second,
He had
third and
the
fourth, fifth and sixth,
Northeast
seventh
room.
and eighth.
The northeast room.
2 grades to 1
Two
class.
grades in a room. And when we had I worked out a system where I could just tap my desk with something to make a noise, and that would change the class. I had on the blackboard the schedule for the day, half hour for English and half hour for mathematics and so on. And then I'd have to have the 5th grade recite, and the sixth grade recite, and then just change back and forth. And by tapping them on the desk, the students knew, after a while, they got used to it. And they knew just what would be coming. And I could conduct the school a full day that way. And when recess came, I always liked to go out and play with the kids and not go out and play with the students a lot. And Arthur encouraged that. He came out too. And when the year got pretty well along, one of the big things in Syracuse is baseball. I guess you know that. So we had baseball.
Even then.
Arthur told me that I was to be the coach of the girls' team, and he'd be the coach of the boys' team. So every week in the spring, we'd go to West Point and Clinton and other places around there, and take at 2 o'clock we'd leave school, go to the other school and play and have our baseball game. And it worked out to be quite a competition. And I guess that just helped form the baseball spirit in Spring City.
They had girls' baseball team.
Yes.
They participated.
Well, my wife was the catcher of the girls' team.
Was you?
I might tell you just a little secret. Maybe I better tell the secrets on this thing
Oh,
here.
you can share it with us.
Yeah.
You won't go any
But how
further.
about that thing up there? Well, my wife was in the first class that I taught.
I'm in the sixth grade.
And you don't want to know about our courtship, I guess, do you?
Sure.
Get only a thing or two.
Just a thing or two about it. Now, what else do you want to know about school? As we went along year after year, it was one of our policies to put on a school play every year, and then a school cantata. And that worked wonderfully well with the students at the school. And of course, Arthur would be the drama coach, and I'd be the one that make the scenery and keep track back the stage and keep the kids quiet backstage. And I remember that we put on quite a number of plays. I recall one was called The Little Clodhopper,
I have a copy of that.
and other plays that were on. And of course, they charged 15 cents, 25 cents to come in to see it. And that would be our money to run the school on. At that time, the school board didn't buy the sports things. We had to buy our own baseballs and bats and soccer balls and so on. And so we just made our money that way to keep the school going.
Since Art isn't here now to be able to say his, so once in a while we might ask some questions about Art. How long had he been there before you came?
Well, he was there a year before I was there.
He came in 1915.
1915, during part of the school year. The principal of the school had left Syracuse School because of discipline problems, and then Arthur went out there to take his place when the year was partly over.
Is he a good disciplinarian?
Best I ever worked under.
Tell us a little bit about it.
About discipline. Well, I won't mention the names of them, but I still remember the problems out there. But Superintendent Burton, H.C. Burton, was our superintendent. And he came out one time and talked to Arthur and I. He told us what the problems were. He said, now, fellows, he says, you've got to get this school disciplined. That's your big job. And he said, and if you have to, get them by the hair and kick them in the stomach. He demonstrated how to do it. Well, we did have to use a little physical force the first year, and a little bit in the second year. But I'll say this for Arthur. After I'd been there for 2 years, it was the most enjoyable, pleasant, well-disciplined school in Davis County. And Superintendent Burton complimented us on that. We had to use a little force to do it. But they turned out to be a wonderful school. I think even today, my fondest memories go back to the last 5 years that I taught there. There was no problems whatever. The respect that we had was just wonderful. And the result was we could help the towns much more, you see. And the students took an interest in the school. We could put on more programs and things like that. Anything else you want to know about school?
We've been told that it was because of Art Anderson that scouting came into Syracuse.
Arthur was a scouter. He liked that. And I know that Eli Rentmaster had charge of the scout band. And the scout band was the center of the scouting in that place for the first year or two. And then Arthur did a lot for scouting. He trained the boys. They went on field trips. They had uniforms. It was a wonderful situation in scouting there. And he always liked it. He didn't give me much of a chance to work in scouting. I worked with the girls and he worked with the boys. Anything else?
Well, to pursue those lines a little bit, this one thing, did he like pinochle back then like he liked it later?
Yes. Arthur was quite a card player. He liked to play cards. In fact, in our home here, Father, well, we just had our entertainment was homemade games, and we didn't ever have any playing cards in our home. We had all kinds of other cards, but Arthur took up playing cards to play pinochle. But I understand that in the summertime he'd mound the irrigation ditch with some of his friends and they'd take a half a day playing pinochle.
Get on top of a load of hay or whatever. That was all the work they do that day until the sun went down.
May I say something then? I came here in 1920 to meet his folks. And when the family would meet, there was a little table here in the middle of the room, a little square table, a very pretty little table. And those men would gather around here and they'd play pinochle on this table in this room. And I remember that. And that was during the 1920s.
One of the things that I learned in my home, the games that we played, both outside games and inside games, helped me very much with the students in Syracuse, because I used the same games on the school ground and in the schoolroom, and they went over good, and the students liked them. And I have learned that to be able to play games for children is one of the finest things they can do. It socializes them, and they don't have so many discipline problems. When adults can play with children, there's no problems.
You said you was going to say something about your courtship.
Well, that's quite a long story. I played a violin when I went out there, and the people found it out, and I began to play on programs. And of course, I played in Syracuse a number of times at meetings and in their parties and the like. And then I was asked to play over in West Point and Clinton and Layton and all around there, you see. And the first time I had to play, Jess Briggs was our janitor. And I was asked to play, and I asked Jess, I said, do you happen to know the person?
Excuse me. It was Jim Barber.
Oh, yeah, wait a minute, Jim Barber. Jim Barber was the janitor. And I said, Jim, do you know of anybody that can play the piano? I need an accompanist for playing the violin. He says, yes, I know a little girl lives down just a half a block down there from the store. And she plays real good. She plays in primary, and she plays here in school. And I'll bet you can get her to play. And so I went down to her house and asked her if she'd play for me, and she said yes. And it was her. And so we practiced together in her home, and the family seemed to enjoy it. And from there we began to play Barry's place. And the first thing, after a year or two, we began to compose music a little bit between us. And I composed a melody, and she composed the company for it. And I recall one time we were asked to play over in West Point. We went over there for an evening, and the east wind came up. When people in Utah talk about east wind, they don't know what wind is, like Syracuse does.
At that time.
At that time. Actually, it's a hurricane. And we got over to West Point, and the east wind came up, and we couldn't get back home. And so we stayed at Bertha Thurgood's place in West Point with her family. And Grandma Smith was quite worried about it. So next morning we took out, we got in the horse and buggy and went to Port Syracuse. And actually the wind blew the horse and buggy and us off the road over against a light pole. And I wasn't very brave going home that time. But we played together for about, 3 or 4 years. And then she finished school, and I lived with Arthur when I went out there in that little bit of a frame house down in the field, from Jess Holt's place on the same mile, but
Log
down
cabin.
in the middle.
Log cabin.
That log cabin.
Mel Hills.
Down Mel Hills Lane. And Arthur and Alice and I lived together there for a couple of years, and then Raymond was born. Then Arthur bought the house up where he lived later on. And one day he told me, he says, "Owen, you can't live here any longer. I'm raising a family. You got to go and live someplace else." So I tried to. I thought I had a place with Clarence Smedley to live. But when I went to move in there, he couldn't take me. Nobody in Syracuse would want to take a teacher in. They just didn't have room for them. And so Arthur said, "Well, then why don't you get married?" And so who to marry? "Well, Julia Tree's a good woman. You can marry her. How about Elsie Cook?" You know those people, I guess.
About Maud Walker.
Maud Walker. Well, I found out that Maud had a boyfriend, Phil Bennett, so that was out. And so at that time, we had been going late one night. We got home late, and when a young man takes a nice-looking young girl at night in the horse and buggy, the moonlight's just right, things happen to a guy. Of course, you probably wouldn't know that.
Not in the horse and buggy, but
Automobile.
Well, it was horse and buggy then. We had a horse and buggy. My horse's name was Bess. I remember, what's that? Victor Waite's older brother. Gerald Waite. Yeah, Gerald. One dark, it was an awfully dark night. Of course, there's no lights in Syracuse. And it was an awfully dark, rainy night. And we were coming home from West Point or someplace up that way. And Gerald Waite was going north past the schoolhouse, and I was coming down south past the schoolhouse. And all of a sudden, I saw a spark come off the road. A horse's shoe had hit a rock and threw a spark off. And just then someone hollered, "Whoa!" And I hollered, "Whoa!" And I found that my shaft had gone through Gerald Waite's breast strap and pulled his harness off his horse. And there he was with the shafts were down on the ground and his horse was unharnessed. He was kind of upset. Of course, I got out and helped him get his horse back between the shafts, and he went on. But I understand the next day he said something to the people in Syracuse. He said, "I think he had his arm around her."
That was a no-no then, wasn't it?
I don't remember that much, but from there on, why, we got to do a little courting. I took her dances, and then we had a picture show once a week there in Syracuse. And I was on the committee to run the picture show. There was, well, Billy Wilcox. And,
It came from Ogden
and
every
Sam
Monday night.
Cook. And I were a committee to keep that recreation hall going. I was supposed to keep it clean, the janitor of it. And they took care of the picture shows. So
That's in the
every-
old amusement hall.
Yeah.
Amusement hall. And, well, then they asked Bessie to play the piano, you know, for the shows. When they put on the picture show, they were all still films. But a script came with the film for the piano player, and with instructions on what to play. Now, when the horses would gallop, they'd go ka-dup, 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 you know. And when there was a nice love scene, it would be a different music. So she used to supposed to play the music to fit the film.
May I say something right here? I always have been able to play by ear, even when I was a little girl. And so, when they'd say horses, I could fix something, you know. If I didn't have the music that they needed, why, I'd manufacture something.
And so I had the nice opportunity to sit on the piano bench and turn pages while she played the piano. And that was part of our courtship. Anyway, we had a nice courtship for about 3 years. The first 2 years, I didn't even think about marriage. In fact, I was dating other girls in Syracuse. But when it came to the problem of marrying, I thought, well, who can I marry? The only one girl that I really felt like I could live with. And that was a girl that was 6 years younger than I was. And so I got up the courage finally after, well, it'd been 4 years there. And she said, yes, she'd marry me. So I bought her an engagement ring. Next morning when I came into the schoolroom to teach school, on the blackboard I found a great big diamond ring on the blackboard. Somebody painted it there with a diamond all sparkling out. You don't know how those kids found it out.
They was following you all around all the time.
Well, by the way, I was only 16. I married him when I was 16.
60.
But through the years, she's been, well, by far the best wife I ever had. We lived together. We've had a wonderful life together. Of course, it caused a scandal, you know, in Syracuse when we got married.
Did it, you know, early life.
That people didn't think that was the right thing for a school teacher to do. But we got along fine. And we lived down in that log house where Arthur first lived, down in the I meant to bring that picture over from Bob's. She painted the picture of the log house. My son has it over there. That log house with a little lean-to on it.
As a boy, I played in that.
Have you?
Yeah.
Well, we lived there for about, 2 years. And Bob, our oldest boy, was born in that house. So that's the story of our friendship, of our courtship.
You mentioned earlier something about, I guess it was ball games and maybe 4th of July's and 24th. You remember the grove of trees down between the amusement hall and that? Isn't that where they did a lot of celebrating?
Oh, yes.
Yes, that grove of trees, yes.
Go into detail and tell us a little bit about that.
I can't remember that too much, but there was a grove of trees there that we used to have picnics in.
Let me tell you
Okay,
a bit
yeah,
about
you tell me.
because I was there when I was a child. In the morning on the 4th of July, Mother always curled our hair the night before and fixed us all up. She always gave us made us a new dress for the 4th of July. We always had a new dress for the 4th of July. And they would have a program in the church after the band had been through town early in the morning. I forgot, I should have said that first. But the band went through early in the morning, just as soon as daylight, they could see.
What band was that?
There was a band in town, And they got on a hay rack with a team of horses, and they start up to east, up to Alders, and they drive clear down to the lake, playing, to wake up the town. And then there would be a program around 9 o'clock, 9 or 10 o'clock.
That wasn't the scout band.
I don't remember what band it was, but it was a band. And then usually several times I have been to those programs, and Governor Charles maybe would be the speaker. He used to come out because he had relatives there, and they would get him.
He was my dad's first cousin.
Yeah. And he very often was the speaker at these programs. After the program, we'd go out back and play, run races, and do things like that. And they usually had a booth where we could buy ice cream and popcorn and the like. And we would take our lunch over there for at noon. The people in the town would come there, and we'd all eat lunch together there in the grove. And then after they got through with lunch and got through playing, then they would have a ball game, of course. And the ball game was usually up near the schoolhouse there, behind the schoolhouse, in that field down in there someplace. I can't remember that, not too clear right now. And then, of course, after the ball game was over, well, that was the end of the day. But I always looked forward to those celebrations on the 4th of July. It was a big day in Syracuse. They really made it a big day.
I must state this. In the summer times, I wasn't around Syracuse very much. You see, I had not finished college when I went out to teach school. And so I had to go to school in the summertime, and also during the winter time take extension courses and correspondence work and the like. And so my summers were spent out at the University of Utah while I was teaching there for most of the years. But some of the years I lived in Syracuse. Now, anything else you want along our later life, or they're just the Syracuse experience?
Well, maybe a little bit. I understand both of you were on a special mission or something for the church. We're back at the Joseph Smith farm in Palmyra.
I can tell you something about that. You see, our church purchased a Smith home about 25 years before we went out there. And they had owned the Joseph Smith home all these years, but they didn't own the Hill Cumorah. On the Hill Cumorah there were 3 farms, and the farmers that operated those farms didn't like the Mormons very well, and nobody else did in Palmyra, I suppose. But these 3 farms were mortgaged by the bank. Pliny Sexton was the banker out there, and he had a mortgage on these 3 farms. And when Pliny Sexton died, he only had one daughter, and she was in California. The church had tried to buy the Hill Cumorah, but they asked him for too much money for it.
Let me say something right there. There were not only the Mormon church after that property, but the Reformed church, reorganized church was after it, and there were 2 or 3 others that had broken off from the church, and they were bidding against each other. And so the price went up and up and up until the church got discouraged trying to buy it.
They asked $500,000 for 6 acres on top of the hill. You couldn't even get access to it. When Pliny Sexton died, his daughter came back sometime after that, and she wanted to sell the property, but she wouldn't sell to the Mormon church, the reorganized church. She just wanted to sell to the farmers there. And so it just happened that George Albert Smith was out there at the time, and he got word of that, and he made a deal with her first name was Elizabeth, and they bought the Hill Cumorah and the 3 farms around the hill and the big Grange Hall. The Grange was a farmer's
He bought it for himself.
in Palmyra. And they got the whole thing, I think, for around $40,000 because you wanted to sell and get our money out and go back home. And George Albert Smith bought the whole thing and then gave it to the church when he came back. Then the church had the property, what are they going to do with it? And so they wanted to send some families out. Now they had sent sometimes out the year before we went out there, or I think 2 years before we went out there. But they hadn't been too successful, so let's see, David O. McKay knew one of the men in Bountiful. He was a missionary in his mission when he was mission president. That was Merle Ellis. And he asked Merle if he could find somebody that would go out there and work that land and live out there and try and build up the branch. There was a small branch of a church in Palmyra. And it just so happened that eventually Merle Ellis and Carson Singley and I were called to go out there. And we went out and took our families, and we signed the contract with the church for 5 years. And we paid them a cash rent on the land out there and try and make a living on it. And well, we got out there the first year. I don't know how much of this detail you want out there, but this, our trip to Palmyra was about the climax of our married life. We came out there, Mormons were not liked very well, and we had to work our way in. And we told our children, we had 21 children between the families of us, and they went to the local school there, the Palmyra and Manchester School. And we told the children to live the gospel and do the best you can in school and don't make any trouble and be an example in the school. But they had a pretty hard time out of it. The first year we were there, the principal of the Manchester School came to my house. I, being a school teacher, I got acquainted with the schools out there, you see. He came to our house and said, the teachers are going to go on strike. They refuse to teach with Mormons in their classes. That was a kind of a shock to me. I thought we were like human beings. He said, what are we going to do about it? And we thought about it, and we decided, well, how'd it be if we let our wives go to school and get acquainted? You know, they had some of the funniest ideas about Mormons out there. And so our wives went to school one afternoon, and then they would tolerate us. And then the next year, things got better and better as time went on. And after about 4 years, 5 of the members, three of the 5 mainstream basketball players were Mormons. And that made a kind of a little different situation in the Manchester High School. Then the next year, the principal of the school, or the superintendent of the schools, came and asked me if I would teach school out there. And I told him that I couldn't. I was there on a church mission. He says, well, if your church will let you teach, will you teach? That was during World War II when they had some problems with teachers too. I said, yes, if the church wants me to, I'd be glad to. So they telegraphed or telephoned the church in Salt Lake and got permission. And so I signed a contract to teach school out there. And I think I'm the first Mormon to teach school since Oliver Cowdery. But he wasn't a Mormon when he taught school. But I enjoyed it very much. And I was well thought of in the school. I worked hard. And the principal of the school was very cooperative with the Mormons. And then we joined the Dairymen's League, the 3 farmers of us, dairymen out there, and we joined the league. And after those few years, I was elected to be a member of the board of directors of the Dairymen's League. That's a local, about 225 dairy farmers. And the next year, I was elected to be the vice president. And the next year, I was elected to be the president. And I worked hard with those dairymen. And you know, we found one of the most wonderful dairy people out there who were dairymen. They're just right, good, down to earth, good citizens. And so that was a kind of a climax of our life out there. But then we found out that our children were growing up. Our second boy was dating a Catholic. And church thought it's about time to bring us back to Utah where the Mormons live. We might marry out of the church. And so we decided to come back, and I came back to Utah, and I began teaching seminary. And I taught seminary down in Santa Fe County for 18 years after I came back, and then I retired.
That's awful.
Let's have a break.
Excuse me,
Portia, our oldest daughter, and I were very close friends. In fact, we still write to each other once in a while.
We're gonna interview her.
She lives on Taylor Avenue.
Yeah.
And
That's my half-sister.
Well, I heard from her at Christmas time.
Oh, I'll have to tell her when I see her. That we've been in your home. In fact, my brother Bill and Portia would just love to be doing what we're doing, going around. You remember Portia, I bet.
Oh, yes. Yes, Portia was just in the 7th grade when I was teaching the 6th grade. She was just
We had a girls group, Minnie Nolder, Portia Holt, Ruth and Ivy Walker, Ruth and Rhoda Walker, and myself, Louise
Minnie.
Miller.
Well, they still meet. You're part of that gang.
I'm part of that gang, but we haven't been together for about 5 years.
She says she tried to get your the group together and found out some of them were having difficulties and things like that. You ready to go?
Yeah, we're so.
You're on. That was personal history for my own benefit. I'm sorry.
Well,
Now, do you want to ask any other questions that we can help you with? Of course, when those girls met, why, they played mandolins for some time, and I played the violin and the mandolin too, so I had
I
to work
played the
with the
mandolin
girls.
with both Portia and Ivy and Rhoda. We used to play together.
We used to get together and play for programs.
You mentioned earlier, when you went out to teach, there had been discipline problems. Can you think of any old pranksters, pranks that they used to
Yes.
play?
Yes,
that was
I
common?
know some good pranks that they played.
You know, something a little bit
In and
humorous,
out the
some of the
windows?
activities they used to have.
Well, I recall I had one boy come from the reform school in Colorado in my class.
His name was Hildebrand.
Him, well, we really shouldn't mention names, but he was a terror. He jumped out the window, and of course I had disciplined him when he jumped out the window and ran. And his mother came back to school, she banged on my door with the butt of a revolver. She stopped at Dan's store on the way up, she's gonna kill me. But she didn't bang on the door, and I went to the door and went out in the hall and talked to her, and she was really mad for me disciplining her boy. I told her what the boy had been doing. I said, no, if he comes in my class, he got to behave himself. Did he do that? He did. Bring him out here and I'll thrash him now. I said, no, you thrash him home, I'll thrash him in school. Problem solved. And one time before I got in that school, some of the boys rode their saddle horses through the hallways of the school.
Well, now let me tell one. I remember the time when some of the older boys went across the street into Barnes's field and brought a big old bull over there. They brought him into the school, took him right into the school and left him in the middle of the hallway.
Overnight.
That's in that.
That was a big bull the next day. What did Art do with that?
That Rampton Durham bull. Rampton had the Durham bull up there.
Cuddy
And
Rampton.
they had, no, it was it John Rampton?
George.
Father of George and Henry,
Jim.
Jim and Henry's father.
George.
He was
Cuddy.
He's a black.
Well, Cuddy was a nickname, so, you know.
George.
Well, they brought that bull in the schoolhouse, in the hallway. See, there was just a cross section of a hallway there. And of course, that upset the school the next day.
Smell it alone.
I remember another instance too, if I may say it. They had a school wagon that one of the ladies down in, the Bodley ladies down in the west end of town would drive up every morning, and then they would leave the school wagon on the grounds. And one day, some of the older boys got the school wagon and backed it up the back steps and put it up against the back door and left it there. They were all doing things like that.
Who drove that school wagon?
Was it Lottie Bodley?
Lottie Bodley.
Oh, Lottie Bodley.
Lottie Bodley.
Is she the only driver you can remember?
Arnold Miller did for a while.
Arnold who?
Miller.
Arnold Miller?
Arnold Miller. They lived down there too.
We had a little shed out back at the schoolhouse where they could put their horses in the daytime. For students that had to ride horses to school. And some of them brought a little hay to feed them there.
I remember that when we'd leave the schoolhouse and walk down the street, we'd get to the blacksmith shop, and that was the most attractive place in town. We'd stand there and watch him, Brother Renton, make shoes and put them on horses.
Now, where was that located?
That was located just below the schoolhouse.
Just
The
south of the
schoolhouse was a little bit
schoolhouse.
on the hill there. And you go down the hill, it was almost at the bottom of the hill, just below the house,
Almost to the church.
almost to the church. It was right in there, and it was right on the path where the kids used to go to school. And in the evening, while he'd be there, and have his anvil going and his fire and all these things, and they were very attractive. We used to stand around and watch him shoe the horses, and how he'd get the shoes red hot, and bring them out and shake them up. The sparks would fly. Very interesting and very, it was just something unusual. We didn't have too many things to entertain.
You learned more there than in school?
Oh, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I had some good teachers.
We had a problem with drinking water when I went there the first 2 years or so. Our water was north, clear across the school ground north. There's a flowing well over there. I think maybe you remember the flowing well there. And of course there's a pond there, and we had some planks put up there so you can go over there and lean down and drink out of the pipe for water. But after a year or two, Arthur and I ran a pipeline from that flowing well down just outside the schoolhouse, put a fountain out there for drinking water. Didn't have to walk quite far to get a drink.
It's my mom. I don't know whether, Clayton, would you know her? This is Priscilla Smith, and she lived in the house just above Aunt Esther's. And she brought she was a midwife, and she brought all of my brothers and sisters, but the three of us, there were,
Sister Session was in midwife.
yeah, sister sisters. Well, Aunt Esther.
Yeah.
I have a daughter named Esther named after her.
Why don't you show us a few pictures and talk about them? I think he can
He'll
zero in.
pick 'em up, yeah, if you can show 'em to him.
Well, that's Mother. And this was taken right after she left Syracuse.
Yeah, you hold them for her and let her talk.
These are my three brothers. I told you before that we were a polygamous family. And these are my two brothers. This was Elias. He was raised in Syracuse. And most people in Syracuse remember him, that remember that age. The other two, my father took to Layton, and he lived with my aunt, his first wife, for a while, because they didn't have any children. And so they came back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. We lived in Syracuse, and then we lived in Layton a lot. And that was Jess. This is Albert. Now this is Albert. He's the oldest one, and he's passed away now. he became an army man. And this is when he got his first bicycle right here, and this was taken when he got a little older. And they're both taken in the same place on Mother's lawn. This is that's Eldridge, and this one here is the little one is Elias. Now his name was Jesse Elias. He was named after our grandfathers. And later on in life, he became Jess. He didn't use the name of Elias for a long time. This is my father, Jesse M. Smith. And Elias. My father was in the stake presidency of the Davis Stake for many, many, many years. And Mother had 8 children by him. Emily, and me, and Elias were raised in Syracuse. Priscilla, and this is Priscilla and Emily, my 2 sisters, in front of the gate at Mother's home there in Syracuse. They've been out picking beans. And this is the one I suggested that you go see, because she can tell you a lot of things. And this is Priscilla, taken on Mother's front lawn. And this is another picture of the home. There.
That's where Francis Wiggle,
He built him a rock house there on the
Yeah.
corner. And I imagine maybe he lived there for a while, I don't know.
yeah, I used to home teach there.
I saw Mr. Wiggle at somebody's funeral over in Tazeville not long ago, about 2 years ago. And he told me that he bought the place from Albert, my brother Albert. He was the oldest one after Mother left. This is my husband and I.
Okay.
Looks a lot like his mother in that picture.
Yeah.
This is when we started working in the Manti Temple. All these are just little memory pictures. He didn't tell you that he became mayor of Spring City while we lived down there. And this was taken at our golden wedding. These are our children. One of them now, the oldest one, the oldest girl, is now the manager of the Beehive House. She manages the house mother there. And this one here teaches at the Y in the communication department of the Y, and has been there for about 30 years.
Yeah, he's bishop of the ward over there now.
And Stanley lives down in Laverne, and he's got a big family.
And they can't see it.
Eileen, her husband is now the Justice of the Peace here in this area right now. And Karen, the youngest girl, is one of the secretaries over at the MTC for the president of the training school over there.
So this picture of the family.
Here they are again. Here we are, Laura. Bob just returned from a mission. This is Bob. He just returned from a mission to the Tennessee mission. And,
Ernest just returned.
and Ernest, the second one, this one, just returned. And he married the little Catholic girl that he was going in Palmyra. He converted her to the church. And they came out to the temple. And it was just as the temple was closing, they came out on the bus. And she didn't have a recommend because she hadn't been in the church long enough and she wasn't able to get one. So they thought they'd come out and
She didn't have a recommend.
they thought they'd come out and see what they could do about it, and if they couldn't get a recommend, then they would never go back. They'd get married in Salt Lake and then go back. So they went over to the church office and told President George Albert Smith their problem. And he walked up and down and looked at Ann. He says, I can't see why you can't have an recommend to the temple. And he sat down and wrote an outline for her. And they were married in the temple. And then the temple closed. They had to get it in fast because the temple was closing. So she has just returned from a mission with her husband. She's been very active in the church all these many years. A very sweet and wonderful person. So here we are.
You still playing the piano for him while he plays the violin?
Oh, he gave his violin to one of the girls. But I still play the piano once in a while. Oh, by the way, that piano, there was a man by the name of Lynn R. Fairbanks that used to come out to Syracuse. And I started taking lessons from him when I was 11 years old. And the studio was over in the Beezer home. What was Mark Beezer's father's name? I've forgotten.
William?
William Beezer. They had the studio over there. He used to come out from Salt Lake every Monday morning, and he'd stop at Centerville, and then he would go to Layton, and then he would go to Syracuse, then he'd go out to Westport. He had those 4 towns that he taught piano in. He came out of the Consolidated School of Music in Salt Lake City. And he'd do this every Monday morning. And I don't ever remember him not being there.
Where was the William Beezer home at that time?
It was just south of the store.
Where? Rampton, or was it Hod Dalton?
I don't know who lived here recently, but...
Was it the big brick home?
Yeah, the big brick home.
Okay.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And then the studio was moved up to Thurgood's, Tom Thurgood's place, after the Beezers couldn't handle it any longer. And then it came down to my home. My mother let the teacher use the front room. And when then Father bought this piano when I was 11 years old. My father bought this piano over in Ogden, this very one. It's an upright grand. The lid raises like the big thing on the piano, you know, the grand piano. And he bought that in Ogden. And I've had it ever since. Emily had it for a while. Mother had it for a while. But this is a product of Syracuse. And we had the piano studio in our home. You can
How
see-
about playing us a piece?
Well, I play hymns.
Well,
It's all right.
it's one of your
That'll
favorites.
do.
Dear, you're gonna have to stand there. Oh. years?
Well, there was a mud place up there. You heard the story about Gentile Street, I guess. The man went down the street on a horseback one time and he saw a man's hat in the road. And he leaned over from his horse to pick up the hat and he found a head under it. And he brushed the mud off the man's head. His eye poked up and he says, "Can I help you out, friend?" He says, "I think I'll make it. I got a horse and saddle under me."
Is he holding this? Firm enough? Pay attention to what you're doing, Mr. Anderson.
Tell us a little bit about the house.
Well, it was just a one-room log house. There was no insulation and it was cold as could be in the winter. It froze every night in the winter time, even in bed. And, but it was a nice place to
When I
live.
went into labor with Robert, it was
For us, it
cold.
was a reasonable place.
We pulled the
just
mattress
took
off the
care of
bed and
Jim
put it in
Hale's
the
cattle
floor in
for the rent of the house.
And I was in labor a long time.
Now, what do you
Finally
say
came in
about
and
the
put
meat
the
and
mattress
that
up
that
on
you
the
hunt?
bed
Well, on the other side of the house it shows here, there's a screen
in that little
porch.
room.
We'd hang our
It is right down there.
beef, our meat out on the porch. It'd freeze at night, and we'd have to we had a saw and an axe, and we'd chop a piece off to get it to cook.
This was a well and a pond there that was by it,
Yeah,
is it?
the
The
pond.
corner of the picture.
There. Can you hold that against your leg so it won't wiggle?
The sun hits it.
And turn.
That's fine.
And that accessed from the Syracuse Road.
Yeah, way down Mill Hills Lane.
You go down through his yard. Had to open the gate.
Okay.
I'd forget to close the gate sometimes. Of course, Mel didn't like that. Had to go out and try and chase his horses and cows out in the field.
The little courtship buggy there at the side of the home. Catch
Yeah.
that.
Was that yours?
Yeah, that's the buggy that we rode in. She never did like the buggy. All the buggies out that way were Studebakers, you know. This was a really special buggy that my dad had.